Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next session. Now here we are in Genesis 22. So an offered son, Yahweh's design for bringing the nations back to himself. So in every one of these, we're talking about the burnt offering, but you'll notice there's a progression here. In the first orange block, we have complete surrender, then complete transformation. Moving my camera angle here just a little bit to say ascension unto the holy mountain. So follow with me here. I'm going to try not to go too fast, but I want to cover as much of this as I can. So Abraham is the offerer. And of course, this is an expression of his complete surrender. But the rest of these purple blocks here, I'm just going to sum up in saying each of these are the moments of the instances between Genesis 12 and 21, where in almost every one of those accounts, we're seeing Abraham struggle with Yahweh's plan. We can't look at Abraham here as the figure of Hebrews 11 quite yet. That doesn't come to pass until we get to the moment of this story in Genesis 22. It's a shining moment in Genesis 12, and Abraham has a few good moments here and there scattered in between these stories, sure. But it's Genesis 12 and Genesis 22 that show the full breadth of the story and how Abraham has completely changed over a period of probably 40 to 50 years there, where he has went from listening to what God has said, but yet as he goes into Canaan, he sees there's a famine, so he goes to Egypt where nobody told him to, and that leads to Pharaoh's demise because of Abraham's mistake. And then he almost gave the land to Lot when they were coming out of Egypt, was struggling between each other's camps. And because he let the younger choose first, he would have went eastward if Lot had chosen Canaan, and Abraham would have settled in Sodom and Gomorrah, which is clearly not where God wanted Abraham at. So that threatened things. And then, of course, he seized Hagar because he was doubting whether or not Abraham or Sarah would ever have the child that God had promised. Of course, God didn't really specify up to that point. He does that after this moment with Hagar. And then he lies to Abimelech the same way he did with Pharaoh, which caused a plague of infertility to fall upon the people there for the time they lived in the land. So this moment where he is offering here is to show that he seemingly has fully understood what complete surrender to Yahweh looks like. Because as God tells him what he must do, Abraham does not show any sign of resistance that we are made aware of. And through this, we also see there is complete transformation because Abraham, as the offerer, has to be transformed, and that's through the offering. We need to understand this connects also to what comes next here, but I'm going to finish this line of thought before I get to that. But that's what's happening. Anytime the offerer gives an offering, they are being transformed through that offering into the smoke and ash that rises from the actual place of the offering's making unto God's holy temple that exists beyond the firmament, right? That's what we get from what the psalmists would tell us when they say that God has erected his temple above the pillars that stand yet above the firmament. And so that is what's going on here is the ascension of the offerer unto God's holy mountain. I would encourage you to go to check the resources in the book by Michael M. Morales, or L. Michael Morales. And the title of that book is Who May Ascend the Mountain of the Lord? A great commentative breakdown of Exodus through Leviticus and portions of Numbers and Deuteronomy that speaks to this core concept here that would really help you understand Leviticus all the more with that. But we understand Abraham is not clean. That points us back over here. And he's certainly not perfectly blameless, but even though he is listed as being blameless, but he doesn't stand guiltless before God. By the right of Leviticus 9, the offering as an animal has to be completely blameless, but the offering is Isaac, which we know Isaac too is not blameless. Now, as the original offering, because that's what God said he wanted. Abraham didn't substitute that in for what God had demanded in his place, that being an animal rather than a human. God demanded Isaac as the offering. He later substitutes the animal in his place, but Abraham is completely unaware of that until the moment it happens. So symbolically, he is the fulfillment of this burnt offering or votive offering that Abraham is giving off as the son. But Abraham's complete transformation is seen in his willingness to offer his son, right? Because he understands that through his son, who is the fulfillment of the promise, Abraham will be completely assimilated and transformed into God's great cloud of witnesses, as the writer of Hebrews will term later on, that will become part of the great throng of God's people, this nation that God is going to bring about from Abraham. So lastly, the burnt offering brings about the concept of ascending unto God's holy mountain. So Abraham is the offerer, and by virtue of this, he is the intercessor for the nations. Now you might think, how did we get that from this? remember, we have to think of Genesis 22 in spectrum with Genesis 12 through 22. Abraham is called out to be a blessing through his family to the nations, but he has a role to play in this as well. And this is how his story ends, even though he does, appear for a little bit in the next few chapters, but that's transitioning out toward Isaac by this point. So, anyway, Abraham and his family will lead the nations up to the summit of God's holy mountain. So, the word burnt, and hence the reason why Isaac is being offered as a burnt offering and not something else, is the word olah in Hebrew, which means ascension, right? So with this, we have to go back to the story of the first burnt offering given, and that's Abel's burnt offering, and then follow that up with Noah's, and that God was pleased with both of those offerings. And in the process, the reason why is because the offerers ascended up into the summit of God's holy mountain. The reason why he was pleased was because of what they expressed through the offering of their gifts. And their offerings, even though it was only temporary, but it was a reconnection to Eden, and it brought them past the cherubim into God's very throne presence, albeit all symbolically. They're still standing there smelling the burnt hair and flesh and fat and everything that's on the altar in front of them. But their hearts rest before Yahweh in that moment while this is happening, because he has made it so through the offering of the animal. So Abraham offers his son Isaac, and that's meant to help Abraham ascend to the summit of the mountain. And he was literally seconds away from executing this very thing. And again, as I pointed out over here, Isaac is the fulfillment of that, because this forecasts for us the fact that Abraham's future son, Messiah, he will act as both ram and son to open the door for all the nations to ascend the mountain and find reconciliation with God and be able to worship the one true God in spirit and in truth. So this story also has connections in many other ways to other stories that come after it, such as the Passover that happens in Egypt, the night of the beginning of their exodus out of there, the 10th and final plague, culminating with Israel now having to act out of faith and offer a lamb or goat to then be able to spread its blood in the proper places so the death angel will not visit their houses with wrath. But that being said, while it peeks back at this is connecting in a larger spectrum here to the concept of exile and exodus and so forth. But as I say that, I'm talking about the exile of the nations. Remember, Abraham comes in the aftermath of the Babel event, when the nations have been sent off now into exile, to spiritual darkness away from Yahweh, who's not dealing with them at all, but now focusing his effort through a new corporate Adam, starting with Abraham, who will then bring about a nation that God is going to use to accomplish mission one. But it's going to take generations to get there, and hundreds of years before eventually Jesus brings that mission into full focus again. So I hope that helps you understand this a little better, and just sum it all up in saying here that burnt offering, meaning complete surrender, transformation, and the idea in anyone offering a burnt offering ever in Scripture is to see it through this lens. And by virtue of that, the summit of God's holy mountain is the end state of that offering if it's offered with the right heart attitude. So Abraham is showing us the way by which the nations will find their way back to God through what is happening in this story. So hopefully that has been helpful.